At 13, my parents said I didn't get to eat because I didn't pay for food. Then they canceled my insurance and told me to be on my own. So I made sure everything was documented and took them to court. I 17 male have parents who had exactly one talent between them looking like they had it together. My dad sold medical devices, good money company car expense account. He treated like a personal ATM. My mom hadn't worked in years, but somehow always had fresh nails and a rotating collection of throw pillows from Home Goods. From the outside, we looked like a solid middle-class family in the suburbs outside Charlotte. That whole thing cracked the week I turned 13. I came home from school needing supplies for a history project, poster board, markers, the usual stuff. My mom was on the couch scrolling her phone next to a pile of shopping bags from TJ Maxx. I asked if she could take me to Walmart, and she didn't even look up. Just said I was old enough to figure it out. Her and my dad had decided I needed to learn how the real world works. Then she hit me with this whole speech about how kids my age in other countries were supporting entire families and American children were soft because parents coddled them instead of building character. Within a month, they stopped buying me lunch money, then school supplies, then clothes. The message was always the same. I was spoiled. They weren't running a charity, and we weren't poor. My dad cleared 6 figures in a good year. They went out to eat 3-4 times a week. They had the money. They just decided I wasn't worth spending it on. So I adapted, picked up odd jobs, washed cars for $10, cleaned gutters for $20, figured out how to make ramen 6 different ways, and which gas station on Route 4 sold day-old sandwiches for $1 after 8 p.m. Bought my own shoes from the Goodwill on MLK Boulevard. Walking into 8th grade in scuffed-up clearance sneakers while your mom drives a leased Lexus does something to your brain that doesn't fully heal. I asked a teacher for an extra pen one day in October and she looked at me like I was pitiful. That look burned worse than going hungry. Never asked a teacher for anything again. My dad loved to perform fatherhood for an audience. At neighborhood barbecues, he'd clap me on the shoulder and brag about how I was learning the value of $1. Told his buddy Phil that the problem with kids today was that parents handed them everything and he was raising a man, not a dependent. This speech was usually delivered holding a $12 cold-pressed juice next to a cooler of imported steaks. Dude had the whole neighborhood convinced he was dad of the year, and if you questioned the act, you got frozen out of the social circle. The thing that really sealed it for me was Thanksgiving that year. They hosted. My mom spent $300 on a spread that could have fed 20 people turkey-glazed ham, 4 different pies. I know the exact amount because I saw the Costco receipt on the counter and memorized it. I sat at that table eating food my parents paid for and realized it was the first real meal they'd given me in weeks. They'd spend any amount to look good for an audience. But feeding their own kid on a random Tuesday, that was my problem. I started keeping notes that night, just a cheap spiral notebook from the dollar store. But I wrote down dates, what they bought for themselves, what they didn't buy for me, every conversation where they told me to handle my own expenses. I didn't know what I'd do with those notes yet. I just knew that one day, the gap between who they pretended to be and who they actually were would matter. And when that day came, I'd have receipts. There was one night around this time, maybe 3 weeks after the whole thing started, where I was eating plain rice in the kitchen at like 10 p.m., and my mom came in for water. She stood at the counter watching me for a second. Then she opened the fridge, pulled out leftover chicken from their dinner, and set the container on the table next to me. Didn't say anything, just went back to her room. My dad never found out. It confused me more than it helped, honestly, because it meant she knew. She knew it was wrong, and she did it anyway every other day except when guilt caught her at the right angle. By 14, I had a steady job at a small engine repair shop near the industrial park off Highway 51. Started sweeping floors and organizing parts bins after school, earned the owner's trust, and within a few months, I was doing real work under his supervision. He didn't ask a lot of personal questions, but he noticed things. He noticed I showed up hungry most days and started keeping a box of granola bars and bottled water in the back room without making a thing of it. He noticed my clothes were getting smaller on me because I was growing and not replacing anything. Left a bag of his nephew's outgrown stuff on my workbench one day with no note. He paid me cash at first, then moved me to a real paycheck when I turned 15 and got my work permit. $12 an hour, 15 hours a week during school, more in summer. Wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, and I earned every dollar with grease under my fingernails. I kept every receipt. Every pay stub went into a folder I hid in the lining of my backpack. I opened a checking account at a credit union across town, not the bank my parents used using my school ID, and a copy of my birth certificate I'd found in a filing cabinet while my parents were out. The credit union had a youth account program that only needed valid ID and a $10 minimum deposit. The account was in my name only, set up direct deposit through the shop, and never mentioned any of it at home. My neighbor Vince became the other anchor in my life during this stretch. Retired electrical contractor, early 60s, former Army. He noticed I was leaving for work before dawn and coming home after dark. One Saturday, he walked over while I was fixing my bike chain and just set a grocery bag on the ground next to me. No speech. No pity face. Bread, deli meat, apples, protein bars. I almost lost it right there on the driveway, but I held it together because that's what I'd trained myself to do. Vince let me store my tools and important papers in his shed after my parents started going through my room. And that was the first real jump from neglect into them actively messing with me. I came home from work one Wednesday and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table with my budget notebook open in front of him. He'd gone through my desk, found my records, and wanted to know why I had over $2,000 saved. He was tapping the notebook like it was evidence in a trial. $2,000. You've been hoarding money while this family bleeds. I spent most of it on school stuff and bus passes. Don't insult me. Where's the rest? I held his stare and said nothing. He couldn't prove anything because I'd already moved my real savings to the credit union. After that, every important document went to Vince's house. Yes, I had to trust a stranger because my family were that bad. In a fireproof lockbox he gave me from his own garage, my pay stubs, my budget records, screenshots of their spending pulled from the family Amazon account. Photos of their DoorDash order history piled up in the kitchen trash, while my shelf in the fridge held a half-empty jar of peanut butter and some American cheese slices going stale. I also started doing small electronics repairs on the side, fixing cracked phone screens and dead charging ports for kids at school. $10 for a screen swap, $15 for a charging port. Wasn't huge money, but it added up to another 100 or so a month that my parents knew nothing about. Every dollar went into the credit union account. School was its own grind. My grades slipped hard because I was running on fumes. I'd work until 9, come home, do homework until midnight, then drag myself out of bed at 6. Failed a math test for the first time in my life, then failed another one. My shop teacher, former Navy guy, noticed I was falling asleep in class and pulled me aside. You lost 8 pounds since September. I can see it in your face. What's going on at home? I gave him a partial version. He didn't push for the rest. He started letting me use his classroom during free periods to catch up on assignments and connected me with the school's free tutoring program. He also just started keeping an eye on me in a way that felt protective, without being smothering, checking my attendance, tracking my weight, noting stuff in his own records. Meanwhile, my parents were perfecting their public image like it was a sport. Church every Sunday morning, front row matching outfits. My dad joined the HOA board. My mom volunteered at the school book fair and posted about it on Facebook like she was saving the world. They looked like parents of the year from the outside, while I ate rice and hot sauce for dinner 3 nights a week. I made a mistake around this time that actually cost me. Left my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while I was in the bathroom, and my mom saw a text from my boss about my upcoming work schedule. It mentioned my hourly rate and estimated monthly earnings. She told my dad that night. They sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that since I was earning adult money, I needed to start acting like an adult member of the household. They wanted $400 a month. I was 15 years old. My dad had typed up an actual document on his laptop, printed it on white computer paper with a header that said, Household Contribution Agreement in bold. $400 a month plus a share of utilities. Effective immediately, signature line at the bottom with a date field. He held it out with a ballpoint pen like this was a normal business deal and not a grown man trying to shake down his own kid. But here's the part that actually hurt. Because my mom had seen the text, she also told him about the side work, the electronics repairs, which meant kids at school found out I'd been exposed, and a few of them stopped bringing me their phones. Lost maybe half that side income overnight, not because of anything I did wrong, but because a 15-year-old's phone repair business doesn't survive when people think your parents might show up asking questions. That stung. I did the math on the rent demand while they watched me. Between the shop and what was left of my side work, I cleared maybe $600 on a good month after taxes. $400 in rent, plus utilities would leave me less than $150 for food, clothes, school supplies, and everything else my parents had stopped covering years ago. It just wasn't possible. I told them I needed a few days to think about it. My dad slammed the pen down. A few days. Real men don't need a few days to help their own family. My mom's voice cracked on cue. We gave you everything and you can't even do this one thing. You just remodeled the bathroom, I said. Rainfall shower head, new tile. You're not struggling. That shut them up long enough for me to get to my room and lock the door. I called my boss that evening. He listened without interrupting, which was his way. And when I finished, he went quiet for a second. Kid, you need someone with a law degree, not a wrench. That one sentence changed everything. Next day after school, I went to the public library downtown and used their computer to search for legal aid in the county. Called 3 numbers and got voicemail automated menus and 1 disconnected line. The 4th one connected me to a receptionist who said minors couldn't request services without a parent or guardian present and hung up before I could explain. I almost quit right there, but I went back the next day, called the same number, asked for a supervisor, got transferred twice, sat on hold for 40 minutes, and eventually reached a woman at the county legal assistance office. She was sharp, direct, and clearly buried under a caseload that could fill a warehouse. She asked specific questions: how old I was, what state we lived in, what my parents provided versus what they didn't. When I described the rent contract, her tone shifted. She explained the basics. Parents in North Carolina have a legal obligation to provide food, shelter, clothing, and medical care until 18. They can't charge rent to a 15-year-old. She told me to keep documenting, and she'd draft a formal letter laying out their legal obligation. She also told me straight up she had dozens of active cases and couldn't be my personal attorney. There'd be stretches where she wouldn't be available. I needed to be realistic about that. The letter arrived by certified mail 4 days later. I wasn't home when it came, but I knew the second I walked through the front door because the air in the house felt different. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter unfolded and his hands flat on the surface, knuckles white. My mom stood behind him with her arms crossed, tight eyes rimmed red. My dad didn't yell. That was scarier than yelling. He spoke in this low, controlled voice. You got a lawyer involved in our family. I didn't respond. You have no idea what you've started. My mom added that people would find out and think they were terrible parents. I stood there with my backpack still on, held eye contact with my dad until he looked away, then walked to my room. Could hear them arguing with each other through the walls for 2 hours, each blaming the other for letting things get this far. The rent contract quietly disappeared from the kitchen counter. But the war was just getting started. My dad put a keyed padlock on the pantry within a week. Only he and my mom had keys. The fridge stayed open, but they started buying only raw ingredients that needed stuff from the locked pantry to actually cook. Like frozen shrimp means nothing when you can't get to oil seasoning or rice. Food existed in the house but was useless to me, and they could point to a stocked fridge if anybody ever asked. They watched my schedule like hawks. My mom started calling the shop to check my hours, framing it as a concerned mom keeping tabs on her hard-working son. My boss played along but pulled me aside after the 3rd call. Your mom called again. Wanted to know if you worked last Saturday and how much you made. I told her you swept floors for a few hours. She's fishing. Kid, be careful. They went through my room at least twice a week. I know because I started leaving tails. A strand of hair across a drawer, a pen at a specific angle. The tails got moved every time. Then my dad canceled my health insurance by not paying the premium on the family plan. I found out when the school nurse couldn't process a visit for a cough that wouldn't quit. That same week, somebody slashed my bike tires at the shop overnight. Security camera footage was too dark to ID anyone. Replacing those tires cost me $60 I needed for food. I tried calling my legal aid contact about the insurance, got her voicemail 3 days straight. On day 4, I finally reached her. She'd been in court all week on another case. She sent a letter, and my parents put the insurance back within 9 days. But those 3 days of radio silence when I needed help, that almost broke me. First time I really understood that nobody was coming to save me on a schedule that worked for my life. Vince drove me to the shop every morning for 2 weeks while my bike was down. But Vince had his own stuff going on. His wife was in assisted living with dementia, and some weeks he was barely keeping it together himself. There were days he dropped me off and I could tell he'd been crying. I started walking the 3 miles to work on days he looked rough, even when it meant showing up late. On those walks, I'd stop at a gas station, and the clerk started slipping me an extra sandwich sometimes without saying a word. Anyway, the worst hit came when I got home one Friday and found my dad had gone through my room again, this time finding a backup drive with copies of my documentation. He was sitting at the kitchen table with it in front of him. You're keeping files on your own parents. His voice was ice, like we're criminals. It's school projects. He leaned forward. Don't lie to me. I read every file on this thing. Delete all of it tonight, or I take your phone, your laptop, and you can earn them back when you remember who pays for the roof over your head. He took them. All of it. Phone, laptop gone for 2 weeks. What he didn't know was that the important stuff was backed up to the cloud and stored at Vince's house, but I lost about 3 weeks of recent documentation I hadn't transferred yet. That was on me. I'd gotten lazy, and it cost me a real chunk of evidence. After that, I backed up daily using the library computers. But the gap in my timeline bothered me for months. Then my dad got fired. Not laid off. Fired for cause. Something about falsified expense reports, which tracked perfectly with a guy who'd been inflating his lifestyle on paper for years. Suddenly, our household was down to one income, my mom's part-time retail gig, and a mortgage that needed 2 real salaries. My dad burned through their savings in 6 weeks. I know because my mom left their bank statement on the printer and I photographed every page. My mom was different during this stretch, quieter. I caught her sitting at the kitchen table one morning staring at nothing. And when she noticed me, she said, "This isn't what I wanted." Not to me exactly, more like she was saying it out loud for the first time. Then she got up and started making coffee like it hadn't happened. But I heard it, and I filed it away. My dad showed up at the shop one afternoon. No warning. Walked right past my boss into the service bay where I was working. "You think you're a big man now? Making money, keeping secrets from your own father?" I kept my hands on the engine, didn't look up. "I'm out there killing myself trying to keep a roof over your head, and you're in here playing mechanic like you don't owe us a dime. You're a parasite." 2 customers were standing like 6 feet away. One had her phone out. My boss stepped between us. "You need to leave now. That's my kid. I have every right. You have the right to walk out that door before I call the police. Pick one." My dad kicked over my toolbox on the way out. Sockets and wrenches scattered across the concrete floor. My boss filed a police report that same afternoon. The smear campaign kicked off the following week. My dad told people at church I was a troubled kid being manipulated by outside influence. My mom backed his story. She always did in public whatever her private doubts were. Worked on some people. A few neighbors stopped waving, but my shop teacher noticed the shift and started documenting what he saw. My weight still dropping, the dark circles, the gap between my parents' public story and what was obvious to anyone actually paying attention. He reported his concerns through proper channels, which triggered a mandated reporting thing under state law. I found out when the caseworker called my cell 2 days later. The caseworker was overworked and running on autopilot. My case was one of probably 40 on her desk. She scheduled a home visit and told me to have my documentation ready. I spent that week prepping. Every photo receipt, screenshot, and dated notebook entry went into a 3-ring binder organized by date. Half my documentation never made it in. The library printer was down for days, and I ended up at a FedEx spending 18 of my own money to print proof my parents wouldn't feed me. I was mostly on my own for this one. My parents staged the house like an open listing, deep cleaned every room, stocked the fridge, took the padlock off the pantry. My dad wore a button-down and used his sales voice. And honestly, the first visit didn't go great for me. The caseworker saw a clean house, a full fridge, 2 parents performing their hearts out. She pointed at the screw holes where the padlock had been, and my dad didn't miss a beat. Had a rodent issue last spring. Squirrels got into the pantry through the attic. We sealed it up, but the holes are still there. Been meaning to patch that. She wrote it down without pushing back. My parents rattled off details about my school schedule. Close enough to sound credible. Not quite right on any of it. The caseworker said the case would stay open and she'd return in 3 weeks, but her tone said she was checking a box before moving to the next house on her list. I went to Vince's shed after that visit and punched a workbench until my knuckles bled. 3 years of keeping records, and the system looked at my parents' clean kitchen and shrugged. Vince found me there 20 minutes later, bandaged my hand without a word, and said, "One visit doesn't close a case, you know that." He was right, but it didn't feel like it that night. After the visit, my parents held the performance for about 10 days. Then old habits crept back. The padlock didn't go back up, but my mom started buying food I was allergic to and claiming she forgot. My dad picked up his nightly interrogations about my income right where he left off. They couldn't help it. Control was their whole operating system. I tracked their finances through the bank statements my mom kept leaving on the printer. Credit card debt climbing fast. My dad's unemployment checks barely covered minimums. They were maybe 4 months from defaulting on the mortgage and too proud to admit it. Around this time, I also started quietly reaching out to extended family. I sent my cousin a long text explaining what was really going on. He called me back an hour later. "I don't know, man. Your dad seems pretty normal at family stuff. You sure you're not just upset about the rules that hurt?" But he agreed to keep his eyes open. I just wanted one person who'd heard my side. My mom had another crack in her armor around this time. I was doing homework at the kitchen table late one night, and she came in to get water. Stood there for a minute, then said quietly, "Your father wasn't always like this." I didn't respond. She added, "I don't know when it changed." Then she went to bed. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough, but it was something real from a woman who'd spent years performing alongside my dad. The unannounced visit came on a Tuesday. While my dad was at a job interview and my mom had called in sick, the caseworker found my mom home in pajamas at 2 p.m., with an empty fridge, a pantry back down to nothing, and my bedroom door removed from its hinges. My dad had taken it off the weekend before as punishment for my attitude. No door meant no privacy, no way to change clothes without being visible from the hallway. The caseworker looked at the empty hinges. "Where is your son's door, ma'am?" My mom's eyes darted. "My husband. It was warped. He took it off to fix it. When last week, I think. And the pantry. Last time I was here, it was fully stocked. We just haven't been to the store yet this week." The caseworker didn't argue. She just photographed the missing door, the empty pantry, the fridge contents. Everything she needed was right there in front of her without the performance in the way. She called me after, and her tone was completely different. Told me things were being escalated. That night was the worst it ever got. My dad came home, and my mom told him about the visit. I was in my doorless room listening to him go from quiet to volcanic in about 30 seconds. He stormed down the hall, red-faced veins standing out in his neck. "You did this," voice shaking. "You brought the government into my house." I said nothing. "The second you turn 18, everything you own goes on the lawn. You are dead to me." I looked at him and gave him nothing. Silence was the one thing my dad couldn't fight. He grabbed my desk chair and hurled it into the drywall hard enough to punch a hole through. Plaster dust just hung in the air. Then he stood there breathing hard, staring at the hole he'd made. And for maybe 2 seconds, his face did something I'd never seen. This flash of something that looked almost like horror at himself, like he could see what he'd become from the outside for one brief second. Then it was gone. He stormed out the front door and didn't come back for hours. Next morning, I showed Vince the cracked wall. He photographed it with timestamps. I reached my legal aid contact. She called back same day for once and told me to file a police report. The officer who took my statement was young and clearly uncomfortable, but he filed it. 3 days later, my parents made their last play. My dad came at me with a new agreement. Softer language this time. No rent, just a voluntary contribution of $200 a month toward groceries. Calm voice, rehearsed delivery. My mom stood behind him, but she wasn't nodding along. She was just standing there with her arms crossed, staring at the floor. I pulled out my own document, 3 pages mostly written myself, using a template my legal aid contact gave me because she was tied up in court again. It laid out every documented incident from the past 3 years. Food deprivation, padlocked pantry insurance cancellation, workplace harassment, property destruction. It said they provide all legally required support without conditions. My income stays untouched, and any violation gets reported immediately. My dad read the first page, and his face went through like 6 different expressions. My mom started crying, not the performance crying, the real kind where your hands shake and your breathing breaks apart. My dad refused to sign, pushed the document back across the table. I'd rather lose the house than let my own kid dictate terms to me. My mom stared at him, and this is where all those small cracks, the leftover chicken at midnight, "this isn't what I wanted," "your father wasn't always like this," finally split wide open. Her voice was flat, dead steady. "Sign it. You're taking his side now. I'm taking the side where I don't lose everything because you can't stop." She paused. "I've been going along with this for 3 years and look where we are." Sign the paper. Kitchen went silent. My dad looked at her like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize. Then he picked up the pen. They both signed. I photographed every page and sent copies to my legal aid contact and Vince before my parents even left the kitchen. Then I went to my room and sat on my bed staring at the hole my dad had punched in the wall. Plaster dust was still on the carpet. I hadn't cleaned it up because I wanted it there. Evidence you could touch. The wall was real. The hole was real. And the document they just signed was the most real thing in that house. People think revenge is a moment. A door slam, a mic drop, one devastating sentence. Nah, real revenge is a system. Months of patience that turns someone's own behavior into the weapon that takes them apart. My parents signed that agreement in December. By March, I had 3 months of documented compliance and 3 months of cracks showing because they couldn't change who they were. Control and image management were hardwired into them. My dad's job search went nowhere. His old employer had flagged his termination as for cause, and medical device sales is a small world. He ended up taking a night shift warehouse gig at a third of his old salary. The caseworker's monthly visits continued. Grocery receipts required, insurance verification required, school progress reports required. The nuclear part happened in April. My dad broke the terms through small deniable moves. He rerouted household bills to a P.O. box so I couldn't track spending. Had my mom switched to the cheapest possible groceries so my food access technically met the agreement while the quality dropped to barely edible. And he launched a campaign to destroy my reputation with extended family. I found out from my cousin who called, sounding rattled. "Dude, your dad called my mom last night. He's telling everybody you're like having a breakdown or something. Said you've been making up stories about them to get attention." "What exactly did he say?" "That you got CPS involved over nothing and you're being manipulated by some neighbor. He called grandma too. She left you a voicemail." "Right? She had. My grandmother's voicemail said she was praying I'd get the help I needed. That voicemail broke something in me I didn't even know was still intact. He wasn't just neglecting me anymore. He was cutting every family connection I had as a preemptive strike against the truth. That was the line. I called my legal aid contact and told her I wanted to escalate to family court. She was honest. She couldn't represent me, but she connected me with a family law attorney who took pro bono cases through the County Bar Association. It took 2 weeks and 3 interviews before an attorney agreed to take my case. Longest 2 weeks of my life. The filing triggered an investigation that required my parents to hand over financial disclosures, parenting plans, and character references. When they listed church friends and HOA contacts as references, those people got phone calls from a court-appointed investigator. Suddenly, the private fiction they'd maintained for years was being looked at by somebody with subpoena power. My dad's references destroyed him. 3 of them independently mentioned that he'd called me mentally unstable. The investigator compared this with my school records. 0 disciplinary issues, improving grades, commendations from my shop teacher. The gap between my dad's story and reality was so wide, the investigator flagged it as evidence of deliberate manipulation. My mom tried damage control by cooperating but made a critical error. During her interview, she brought up the rent contract on her own, calling it a misunderstanding. She didn't realize the investigator already had a copy. When confronted with the actual document demanding $400 a month from a 15-year-old, she admitted my dad wrote it, that she'd gone along with things she shouldn't have, and that things at home had been worse than anyone knew. That cracked their united front for good. The family court judge reviewed everything in June. All of it. The binder, the photos, the letters, the police reports, the CPS records, the investigators' findings. Judge ordered mandatory parenting classes for both of them, continued CPS monitoring for 12 months, and appointed a guardian ad litem to oversee my welfare. The judge also issued a formal finding that both parents had engaged in financial neglect of a minor child. That went on their permanent record with family services. My dad sat in that courtroom and listened to a judge call him a neglectful parent while a court reporter typed every word. My mom sat next to him with her hands in her lap. Neither of them looked at me. Their social circle dried up after that. Church friends crossed the street at the grocery store. The HOA removed my dad from the board. The mortgage became impossible on his reduced income. And by August, they'd listed the house selling at a loss to avoid foreclosure. The house they'd used as a prop for their perfect family act went to a young couple for $20,000 less than what they owed. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. But the moment that actually killed their reputation wasn't the court record. It was a Sunday in July at a neighborhood block party they hadn't been invited to, but showed up at anyway. My dad walked up to a group of dads around the grill and tried to act normal, cracking jokes, doing his same old show. Phil was there. Phil's wife had been interviewed during the investigation. Phil didn't say anything dramatic. He just kind of looked at my dad, then looked away and kept talking to someone else. My dad stood there for a few seconds with his hand half out for a handshake that nobody took. He laughed at something nobody had said, one of those forced laughs that makes everyone cringe. Then another neighbor said something like, "Hey, everything okay at home these days?" in this flat tone that made it clear he already knew the answer. My dad started saying something about privacy and family business, but he was talking to backs that had already turned. Nobody yelled, nobody made a speech. They just stopped including him like he'd already left. My mom tugged his arm after about 2 minutes of him standing on the edge of the group, trying to find an opening that didn't exist. And they walked back to the house. Sometimes the quietest rejection cuts deepest. My cousin eventually came around after the court findings reached the family. He told me a bunch of relatives had quietly apologized to each other for believing my dad's version. My grandmother never called me directly, but my cousin said she stopped talking to my dad entirely. The final confrontation came in September. I was 16. Got accepted into a dual enrollment program at the community college. My boss had given me more responsibility at the shop. Vince helped me open a savings account earmarked for college with over $4,000 in it. Most of it earned at the shop, some from the electronics work I'd rebuilt after the initial hit. My shop teacher wrote me a recommendation letter. I was at the kitchen table doing homework when my dad sat down across from me. He looked 10 years older than he was worn through. My mom stood in the doorway behind him. He cleared his throat like he'd practiced this. Things got out of hand on all sides. I think we can agree on that. I didn't look up from my textbook. Families go through rough patches, he said. But we stick together. That's what family means. I closed the textbook, looked him dead in the eyes. You stopped feeding me when I was 13. You locked the pantry. You tried to take my money. You showed up at my job screaming. You told the entire family I was crazy. I paused. That's not a rough patch. That's a choice. You made it every single day for 3 years. I'm trying to. I'm not done. I don't hate you. Hate takes energy I can't waste on you. But I will never trust you again. Every decision I make from here on out is designed so I never need a single thing from either of you ever again. That's not anger. That's just math. My dad stared at me. My mom wiped her eyes in the doorway. Neither one argued. There was nothing left to argue with. I went back to my homework. They went to the living room. I heard the TV click on low volume. Some reality show my mom liked. Normal sounds in a house that hadn't felt normal in 3 years. It was quiet that night. Not tense quiet. Not pretending quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after something's been broken all the way through and everybody knows it can't be fixed.